Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
Hey, everybody. Great to be with you today. It's Matt Strozziak stepping in here momentarily for Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, military attorneys at the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. We've got a great episode scheduled for today. We're going to talk about the firm's core values and mission statements and a little bit about the guiding principles that these guys work within every day. I would be worried about this episode if it were a different law firm, because I think sometimes this stuff is fluff and it's done as part of a protocol. It really doesn't mean that much to the lawyers. But I'm very, very excited to do it with you guys because I've seen firsthand the passion you have, the belief you have. And I think there's probably a lot of independent information about you online and in other places that would attest to that as well. So welcome, gentlemen. It's good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy to be back in the studio to record the Military Justice Today podcast.
Happy New Year, Matthew.
Pick up the energy, Mick. Come on, man. We're talking core values today.
Mick and I just
Happy
had some
New Year, Matthew.
Great Greek food. Wasn't that place good? It's kind of a sleeper.
I really did like that place. You know what I liked about it? The name of the meal was called Zeus.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool.
That should be your nickname, Zeus.
Well, I told you I had a cat named Zeus, and he was a killer, just kind of like Butters is, my other cat.
Mickey really is the owner of the most ferocious cat in the state of Georgia. He's a little on the downhill now. He's a little older now. But when that cat was young, that cat was a straight killer. There wasn't a squirrel within a two square miles safe from Mickey's cat.
Well, squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits. That thing has killed several rabbits. They got
to be pretty fast to catch a rabbit.
Yeah, well, he's orange. And in the wintertime, the grass, at least up here in Atlanta, the grass turns orange. So he blends right in. So that's when he gets a lot of kills, because those little critters are out there trying to get food. In the wintertime, they got to expose themselves, and that's when Butters strikes.
Mickey, I have to think that the audience has a very obvious question is, if the cat's a killer, and I trust that it is, because you know how to recognize that, how does its name end up Butters?
Good point, Matt.
And then from Zeus to Butters, I mean...
How do you explain that, Mickey?
Kind of soft.
Well, the difference is when I had Zeus, it was me. And now that I have children, they name the pets, right? So Butters got his name, I think, for one of my kids. Might have been Barrett who named him, actually.
The first time I ever hung out with Mickey outside of work, I crashed at his place when he was living at Fort Campbell. I slept in his spare bedroom, and guess who joined me for the evening? Butters.
Really?
Yep. I woke up with Butters right on my chest.
He was doing a power play. That's what he does.
He was hunting me, baby.
It is fascinating, though, to watch cats hunt. I mean, you just watch cats we've got a few around our neighborhood that go out every morning. They kind of go to the same place, open field, and it's fascinating to watch them go. Even your regular house cat.
Our cat used to be an outdoor cat, but my wife is very concerned about coyotes now, so we have not let her out in a long time, and she seems happy, but she'll go up to the window when she sees birds and make this really strange noise, like this guttural noise. And when we lived in Columbus, Georgia, she would kill birds on the reg. Now she's retired, and my wife does not let her out because we have coyotes that roam the neighborhood that will hunt out the neighborhood cats, which is true. One cat and one dog did end up missing in my neighborhood.
Well, I remember that cat at Tar River, what you're talking about.
That's right.
And she was beefy, man. Like that was a barn cat.
Yes, she was a barn cat. She literally slept with the horses.
Yeah, and those things are tough. And that cat was tough. Now I look at it, I was like, man, you were once great. Now you're
I'm not even
out.
a cat person. I like dogs. I ended up with this cat kind of by happenstance. But before we move on to core values, it has come to my attention just recently that Rich, our producer, has been holding out on us. That he can, in fact, make all kinds of cool sound effects for the show that he has not made.
We never knew.
So, Rich, I want to hear the laughing people. I want to get some sound effects. Go.
See, that's what we need for my bad jokes. We need the laugh track. That's what we need.
That's what we need, especially when Matt gets aggravated on the podcast when we're not answering the questions concisely enough for him. We need to play that.
I think that should be every time Butters gets a kill. Well, let's talk core values and mission statement. And what I said earlier in the show is actually very true. I don't think enough law firms spend time on this in general. And then the ones who do, it's almost an afterthought. It's like, oh, we need a mission statement. We might need a diversity statement. We have different things we want to do. But you guys, it truly is legit. You have very core values that you believe in. You fight these cases with an enormous amount of passion. It means a lot to you. I've seen both of you get excited about cases before. But I think it's phenomenal that you do it. I want to spend some time talking about why you've done it and why you kind of put a structure to it, why you continue to do it consistently and make sure that everybody in your firm does it. So let me start with that question. Why did you decide to kind of make this a part of the firm and its belief and what the firm stands for?
These core values have been with us as a firm when it was just Mickey and I. Before we even had, paralegal and other attorneys that would help us. And I think it's because for us, Mickey comes from a background with the Ranger Creed, something that they lived by. For me, having served in the Army, we have our Army values that I always took seriously. And I've oftentimes felt that what we do now is an extension of the service that we rendered to our country. I feel that, I left the JAG Corps because I wanted to help give service members a voice. I wanted to fight for them. I felt it was something I was skilled at. If we want to get down to it, quite frankly, it's part of the reason why I think God created me in the first place, was to help these folks that need help, because the system is designed right now somewhat unintentionally to really spit on the service member who's accused of a crime. And they're not always given the best legal options. They need skilled and talented lawyers. So for me, it was an extension of the service that I had rendered to the country. It was an extension of my oath as a military officer. I just do it now as a civilian. And it came very naturally to create these core values in this mission statement.
What would you add to that, Mickey? What would you add to what Rob said? Is it the same feeling? You kind of think it came from your service to our country, or was it something different for you?
Yeah, so Rob and I, we agonized over these values. We actually sat there and took the time. What do we stand for? What is our purpose? Why are we doing what we do? And when you're in the Ranger Regiment like I was, or in the military, it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to think about. And I remember every single day at formation at 0600, you'd be out there before PT, you got to say the Ranger Creed. And it had kind of a hypnotic effect. After a while, it was almost subliminal. And you just kind of knew what you were doing and why you were doing it. You knew you were the best at what you did. You knew why you went out there every single day and did what you did. And that's the same thing with our firm. We wanted something similar where we had a purpose behind everything that we did that we could relate to and that we think we should strive for every day. We're not perfect, right? It's not, these are goals. This is not a place where you remain. These are places that you're trying to get to and stay at. And it's a fight every day to remind yourself. So you say these core values. And also it's about developing a culture within our firm, because we have people from all sorts of different backgrounds who come in, and maybe they just were a paralegal, or maybe they're just straight off of civilian life. So it's a way of bringing them in and being able to appreciate what we stand for, what the firm stands for.
Yeah, and consistency is key, right? I mean, you guys do this regularly. The same thing with the Ranger Creed. You did it regularly, and you almost have to on stuff like this, don't you?
You do. We cover this mission statement and these core values at the start of every single weekly meeting. We have an evaluation system for the people that work with us, our employees and our law partners. And this is the core values form how we grade our own attorneys. We give them grades for each individual core value. Every decision that Mickey and I make as business owners, every decision that we make as leaders of our firm, every decision that we make, from in court martials, big decisions, we try to filter through these core values, because if you're doing that, you're going to get to the right answer more often than not, because human beings are fallible, right? We feel emotions like energy or, like selfishness. We feel emotions, anger. We get frustrated. But if you go back to these core values, it will guide you. So we're very serious about them. It's, I think in some ways, maybe even the backbone of our firm.
Yeah. Certainly wasn't something that was created, put on a shelf, and revisited here and there, and I think that's great to see. Well, should we read some of it or all of it? Should we read some of the mission statement and then maybe talk specifically about each core value?
Absolutely, I'd love to share the Capovilla and Williams mission statement. Capovilla and Williams was founded in the belief that the accused's right to the best possible defense, guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution's Sixth Amendment, is a bedrock of American democracy and a bulwark against tyranny. All persons accused of a crime are entitled to an attorney who will advocate on their behalf, fighting for due process and a fair hearing. Capovilla Williams was created to be a voice for the accused, without interference or pressure from anyone or anything but our own desire to protect and defend America's service members and to uphold the United States Constitution. And we've given a lot of thought to that mission statement. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to the topics we cover almost in every episode of the podcast without fail. I mean, we're constantly talking about the rights of the accused, due process, the Constitution, and what service members should be doing to make sure they're protected in those ways, right?
That's right. This is fundamental to who we are as a firm. I've said on this podcast before, I think there's even a clip on our website, I don't like bullies. I've never liked bullies, and there is certainly a time where the United States government can act as a bully. Individual prosecutors from time to time can forget what their true purpose is. Getting a conviction can become the most important thing to them, and that's why we have an adversarial system. No matter what that service member is charged with, no matter how grotesque it may be, they have a right to confront their accuser. They have a right to put their case in front of a judge or a jury and fight for their liberties. And in this country, the government should not be able to come in and take everything you are and everything you're ever going to be based on mere allegations. There is a process that has to be respected, and that's something that we take very seriously.
And Mickey, the system has to afford that to everybody for it to work for anybody, right? I mean, you can't pick and choose which defendant gets a vigorous or fair shake, a vigorous defense or fair shake, right? I mean, it has to be given to everybody.
Yeah, that's equal protection under the law, right? I mean, that's part of our judicial process, our judicial system. And when you start seeing rules being relaxed, right, or objections being overruled, or motions being denied, or evidence being withheld from the defense for whatever reason, and you see kind of an erosion of that, well, if you can't trust the judicial system, what options do you have if you're accused? And one of the great reasons why we have this system that's supposed to be fair is so people can trust their government. Because if you can't trust your government, what options, probably not the ones that the government really wants, are you left with?
Yeah.
Right? So, absolutely.
I've always liked in your Giant Killers video when you say, we don't answer to your command. We answer to you. And I think that's really important because, Rob, we've talked, and you have it here on kind of our show notes, about the pressure. I mean, there's a lot of pressure being exerted on your clients and you guys, frankly, to do different things, to not do different things, and to be able to stand steadfast in the face of that pressure. I think it's not easy, I'm sure, at times, but it's required.
Well, as far as command goes, here's what I'm going to say. It is arbitrary and kind of nonsensical to say that in every case we need to stand up and fight the command. 95% of cases, our goals are to work with the command to get our client the kind of result they deserve. By and large, military members, especially commanders, are the cream of the crop in terms of integrity-driven people that we have to offer as a country. Are there situations, and have there been situations, where we have to stand up to a 06, an 07, an 08, absolutely, it happened. It has to be done with discretion, but there are absolutely times where our clients' rights are being violated and they deserve a voice. And we are free of any backlash from a command, period. They can't court-martial me, right? Now, that doesn't mean we're acting recklessly. We are professionals. We come from the military system. But there are absolutely going to be times where we have to be aggressive. We have to have that fighting spirit. And it's something that we take that seriously. No commander is more powerful than the United States Constitution, period.
Well, I think that's well said. And obviously there's an incredible love of country at your firm with every member that's a part of it. That has never changed. That's always been there. And you guys have, you've spent a significant amount of your lives following orders, and I don't think you have a problem with that either. But in those cases,
well, Matt, I can't speak for Mickey. I'm married, so I'm still following orders. I'm pretty sure Mick would agree with me on that. I've seen him around his wife before, so I know he follows orders too.
And Butters, if Butters wants to order him around,
Butters. Let's say I'm low on the totem pole in the house as far as leadership goes.
If Butters wants fed, Butters going to get fed. Mm-hmm. So, well, let's. Anything else on the mission statement, or kind of we talked about some important things, the creation of it, the why behind it, how often you share it, how much of a part of the firm's culture it is. I don't think you can underestimate setting a culture at any kind of business, law firm included.
I'll say this too, as kind of a final point on the mission statement. Whenever I give a closing argument, I wear my lapel pin that says "Don't tread on me," which has now been kind of politically tangled up with a certain political party or a certain president. I was wearing it before Donald Trump was president of the United States. To me, that harkens back to a foundational principle of why our country was formed the way that it was formed. Because prior to us breaking away from the British government, at a snap of the fingers by the King of England, they could come to your home, take you from your family, throw you in the brig, and leave you there. That was part of the impetus that led to the Revolutionary War, which is where "Don't tread on me" comes from. Yes, of course, taxation without representation. But when you go back and you look at the primary documents and the discussions about the United States Constitution that happened, I think it was 1781 or 1782, they specifically talk about the arbitrary power of the king. And that's why I wear that when I close. Now, I have to think twice about wearing it because I don't want panel members to think I'm associated with one party or another.
Sure.
But that's why I've worn it my entire career.
Interesting. That's an interesting point. It's a good point. Let's transition a little bit to the core values. And I think those are somewhat reflected in the mission statement, but I think that we've talked a lot about them, at least about the first one in many of the episodes, especially the most recent ones. So the first core value is simply respect your client. Let's talk a little bit about that. Mick, you want to start on that one and kind of what is the foundation of that? Sounds very simple, but anybody who's been associated with a law practice knows that clients can be difficult. Their issues are important. Their issues are sometimes complex, both factually and legally. And so perhaps it's not always an easy thing to do, but it is one of your guiding principles.
And it's our very first core value, which is important because the client is the most important thing to us while we're representing that person. It's one of those things you have to tell yourself as an attorney every time you pick up the phone, every time you answer the call, because you have to place yourself in the shoes of your client a lot of times to understand where they're coming from, what they're upset about, or what concerns that they have. I think what happens with other firms is they'll be like, oh, I don't really want to talk to this guy, or they'll maybe not return the phone calls. That's a big complaint, right? Not getting back to your client, which is a lack of respect for your client. Your client's calling you because they need something. They need help. So you have to sit there and go through it with them, right? Because they are in this position that they didn't want to be in, and they're coming to you for help. The second thing, too, about that is you got to be honest with your client also. So that's part of respect. They didn't hire us to tell them what they want to hear. They hired us to tell them what they need to hear.
And those are tough conversations, I would assume.
Very tough sometimes, but they respect you. They respect you for that as well. So you don't want to sell them a dream. You sell them reality. You obviously can't give 100% certainty on things, but you can kind of give them an idea of where it's likely to go. So that's part of it. So respecting your client has a lot of things that are part of that value. But I think the number one thing is being honest and being available.
Rob, do you believe it's a challenge, either for you or generally in the legal industry, to continue to remind yourself that this is the first time a client is going through this? I mean, it's so easy to get complacent because you do this every day and you know the answers and you know where this is going, and oftentimes you probably know how things might end up. But you have to understand and have that empathy that person who's calling you and seeking your advice and your professional opinion, it's the first time for them.
That's a great point. And if you look at the first two sentences we have next to respect our client, or respect your client, the client is the lifeblood of our business, and they will be treated with respect. Our clients come to us during their most difficult times. They deserve compassion, honesty, and integrity-driven representation. It's right there in the second sentence of core value number 1. It is always a struggle to be empathetic, I think, for most people, especially in our line of work where we deal with it every day. Mickey's right. We have to remind ourselves, and we tell this to our team, you have to remember, they've never been through this. To you, it's everyday business. Court-martial, motions, judge, jury, no problem. Easy, done it many times, done it successfully at the highest level you can in the military. To the client, this is terrifying. I've had Army Ranger clients, I've had Green Beret clients tell me that we've had a Delta Force client tell us that experiencing the pressure of an investigation in a court-martial is the most stressful thing they've ever gone through. And you're talking about men and women who live in stressful environments.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you have to remind yourself every phone call to be empathetic. And that is, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to be honest with listeners, that is a challenge. But you have to do it because they deserve that.
Yeah, and I think so many attorneys get that wrong. They really do. I mean, I guess I have the experience of listening to a lot of phone calls that lawyers have with either prospective clients or existing clients in my line of work. And I don't know whether they just get worn down or they haven't made it enough of a priority at the firm like you guys have. But
they forget their roots. You know, in this life, you have to be grateful for all the little things that make life so wonderful, from the sunshine to college football to these things that make life worth living. Family, friends, all that sort of stuff. And from the professional perspective, you can't forget why, this is the purpose of the podcast, right? Why we're doing this. We cannot ever forget why we formed this firm. And that's why we have these values. That's why we're doing this podcast, because the minute we forget it, we'll lose our soul. And then I guarantee you we'll be less effective in the courtroom.
Yeah, and probably less successful. Because I think a lot of your guys' success is built on how you choose to go about things. Let's talk about the second core value, which is zealous advocacy. Who wants to talk about that a little bit?
Mick, that's all you, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that you're taught in law school at the very beginning, right? Is that you got to advocate zealously for your client at all times. What you'll find is, just like Rob said, complacency can kick in. You can find yourself in a place where you're arguing for a pretrial confinement hearing, and you know the odds of getting your guy sprung are very low. So how much work are you going to really put into it? Are you going to put a ton of work into it just to get stomped,
Yeah.
But the reality is you really don't know how that hearing is going to go. You might think you might know, right? And it might very well go that way, but you'd be surprised on how many times I thought it was going to go one way and it went a completely different way. Right. And that works against you also. You could think that, hey, I think this is going to go our way. And then you get crushed. But the point is, you can't get complacent in there. You've got to always be prepared, and you've always got to give 110% in there for your client, because like Rob said, lifeblood of our firm are the clients. It's a very scary moment for them. One bad move pre-trial could affect the outcome of the actual trial.
Sure.
And you certainly don't want to lose the trust of your client. And if they don't think you're doing your job, that's going to impact your relationship and ultimately your advocacy. And you can't have that. So yes, fight, and you got to fight hard.
Yeah, and we've covered that in a number of different podcasts. We've talked about things like opening statements and closing arguments, and in each one of those, you guys talk about a commitment to the process. Here's what we do. We do it every time. We lock ourselves in a room. We gather every statement. It isn't we gather some of the statements or we gather the most important ones. It's we gather every single statement, put it into a table or a matrix, and we start to work with it. So we've talked about those things. Clearly, you guys are living that zealous advocacy core value. Is it hard sometimes, Rob, to do that? I mean, you're seeing the same things over and over again. Sometimes you're dealing with the same prosecutor who things didn't go so great in the last case with them. Is it hard to stick to that or not so much if you're committed to it?
That's a hard question. Do I think it's hard to stick to that? No, I don't. Do I think it takes discipline to honor the process? I do. It takes discipline to go to work every day, close your door, get through 300, 400, 1,000, 2,000 pages of discovery. It takes discipline to keep track of all the different dates that these judges now put in their pretrial orders. So is it hard? I wouldn't say it's hard. I don't think most things that require discipline are hard, but it is necessary. And it does require discipline. I mean, you have to discipline yourself because to me, zealous advocacy means you're honoring the process from start to finish. Because I'm not talking about courtroom here. What I talk about when I think about zealous advocacy is respecting the process, interviewing the witnesses, getting the motions done thoroughly, because that's really the hard part. If you're a trial lawyer like Mickey and I are, and that's what's in your heart and your guts, we talk about this all the time. Showing up and trying the case when you're prepared is fun. That comes naturally to us. Now, it's not so fun for the client, but for us, that's our game day. It's the preparation that goes into it because, my goodness, it's hundreds of hours sometimes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the next core value, which is honesty. And we talked actually quite a bit. Maybe we don't need to talk about this as much because we talked about it at the beginning, but being honest with your client, it's another value that I think gets relaxed oftentimes at different law firms because firms need to bring in business. It might be easier to tell a client that you think you can get a result that you can't because you need to pay the electric bill that month or the water bill or your payroll. So it's everybody knows what it is. It isn't always easy. What would you add to what we already covered?
Well, I was recently given a copy of the lawyer's prayer by a prior father of a client in a court-martial that I had won. And I don't have it in front of me, but the last few sentences talk about can you behave in such a way as a defense attorney where you're able to keep your soul and you're able to keep your values and your principles. And that is a hard thing to do because you are in the throes of competition and you want to win.
In the arena.
In the arena. And you want to get hired by people. That being said, the only way that I could look myself in the eye and look at my family in the eye and lead my firm as best I can is if I know I'm being open and honest with my clients. I strive to do that, even in the initial phone calls. If I hear something that I know is not good for them, I'm going to tell them. We always have conversations with clients about their prospects for winning. We have to do that. I can honestly say sitting here, I've never misled a client on their chances in my life. And here's the bottom line. You don't know how trial's going to go. I hear a lot of our competitors at times or other attorneys talk about, oh, that's a slam dunk. That's a slam dunk. Those words have never come out of my mouth. There's no such thing, especially in sexual assault trials. The second you think it's a slam dunk is the second you're going to overlook the facts you can't miss, and you're going to lose. And you don't know what 8 people are thinking about the case anyway.
Yeah.
So, that to me has always been being upfront realistic with expectations with clients.
Mickey, do you think that's an innate quality? Do you think that that's something that some folks just have? And what I mean is the inability to be anything other than brutally honest. Do you think that some people are just built that way? And no matter how tempting it might be, or no matter how hard it might be to be honest, do you think some people just can't do anything but?
I think there are some people who are that way, sure. And I also think there are people who struggle with being honest because they have to tell somebody bad news, right? When you're doing evaluate, like I remember when I was in the service, what do they tell you to do first? Tell them all the good things about you, and then tell them the bad. And there's also this problem where officers and NCOs will actually believe what's written in the OVR, the NCOVR, which is all a bunch of fluff, right? It's just like stuff to make you feel good because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So, and that goes back to not want to tell people the truth, right? Which is what they need to hear because they're not going to develop otherwise. The same thing goes with your client. And I've done this many times. I know Rob has too, is I'll have a potential client on the phone and I'm doing a lead and I'll tell them not to hire me or hire our firm because there's not much we can do for them. And I'll tell you, man, more often than not, they want to hire at that point because you're being on. You're not just trying to get money from them. You're being honest with them, and they respect that. So yeah, I think it's important. But your question is it an innate trait? Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Rob, you think you guys have lost cases over the years, lost clients because you are more honest with them than maybe somebody else?
Oh, I know that we have. That's a fact, and that's okay. That's okay. And I don't know so much if we lost, people from hiring the firm, but I know for a fact we've had clients over the years who, throughout the court-martial process, wanted us to tell them one thing, and we couldn't. We couldn't. And I'm very careful about that because we're dealing with real lives, flesh and blood people. The last thing that I want is to mislead a client and then see that client, hauled away in handcuffs. That's hard enough as it is.
Sure.
That's hard enough as it is. You've got to be honest. You've got to be honest with them about their chances as far as you can see it. You got to answer their questions honestly. And no pun intended, honestly, right? I think that has helped our business. And honesty doesn't just mean with our clients. It means with the court as well. There's a lot of times where in front of a court, in front of a military judge, I'll say, Your Honor, in full candor to the court, I have no case law to support this position. Or, Your Honor, in full candor to the court, this case does oppose my position. I've seen too many defense attorneys try to go convince a judge that, green is white and white is blue. And it's just, the bottom line is those judges are smart. They're going to figure it out. It's best to look them in the eye and be honest, because not every legal issue is a clear-cut winner for your side. And you owe it to the court to be honest. So I'd like to think it's a matter of our culture that extends not just to our clients, but to our opposing parties, to the opposing party, and also to the military judge or the panel.
Well, real quick about that too. Just a little example. What I think is funny or unique, I don't know. Judge will ask you, "Is there anything else you'd like to add?" And a lot of times I'll say, "No, Your Honor, that's all I got." But the prosecution, they'll ask the prosecution, and be like, "Yes," and they'll keep going on and on and on. And the judge will be like, "Anything else?" And they'll keep going on and on and on. So the judge has got it. They want to make sure you got everything out there.
Yeah.
But the prosecution or even inexperienced defense counsel just think they have to talk.
Rob,
that's a great point. That's something that I've done a lot recently. It's like I had a 412 hearing, a few weeks ago, and the judge, it was about whether nude photos the day of the incident should be admitted into court, which I thought was a slam dunk argument. And the judge is giving me a very, very hard time and clearly isn't agreeing that it should be admissible, and asked me 3 different times, is there anything else, counsel? Like I'm missing something. Finally, I stood up and said, Your Honor, there is nothing else. That is my argument. That's all I have. And that's what it is.
Rob, do you think if Mickey was ever short on case law and he's standing in front of the judge, he could measure his biceps and that would be persuasive?
Get the sound effects.
Where's
ready.
the sound effect? Come on.
Out there for Matt.
It was a little late.
It started with some 1970s music there.
Yeah, what was it like?
It was a little late. But his biceps are persuasive, are they not?
You talk about Mickey's biceps all the
I love
time,
Mickey.
man. I don't know what's up with that.
I love Mickey. I mean,
I love
Mickey's
you
my
too.
guy. If Dan's not here,
I love
If
your
Dan's here,
biceps.
Dan's Well, let's talk about this. There's a couple more on the list, but I definitely want to talk about toughness and courage. It's going to be the most challenging one to talk about because I know you guys very well. Neither one of you like to talk about how tough you are, courageous. Can't get Mickey to talk too much about anything he's done, even though, he's done some phenomenal things during his service years and since. So I think I might have to pull it out of you guys a little bit, but maybe you could talk about each other and then you wouldn't worry about having to talk about yourself. But the next one on the list of toughness and courage, which in your line of work is certainly a necessity.
I've thought about moving this one up and having a conversation about moving this one up to number 2 on the list. because to be a defense attorney, you have to be tough. And when you step into a courtroom, in the military in particular, and the other side has 7 victim advocates and traveled with 6 of their best friends, and the entire staff judge advocate's office is in there looking at you, and mom and dad are in there believing that their daughter or something really bad happened to her. It takes a lot of courage to get up there, stand by your client who the world may have already convicted despite the evidence, and give that client a voice. That is a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to win, believe it or not. It's a hard thing to go through this and experience with this client, the ups and downs, and come out victorious. Of course, it's a wonderful feeling, but it's hard. You know, you recognize that that client's life is never going to be the same. And I'll tell you what, it's awfully hard to lose. Even when you know your client is guilty and you know that you should lose, it's still a tough thing to do to see this individual that you have spoken for the last year hauled away in handcuffs. You have to be tough to do this job. If you're not, you've got no business being a trial lawyer. Go back to reviewing wills or estates or whatever the case may be. And it's funny that of all the people that I did moot court with in law school, you know how many of us are actual litigators? Of the 15 of us on the team, 2.
Yeah.
2. It's a hard job. There's no question. So when I think about toughness and courage, I think about the courage it takes to stand up for a man or a woman that the world has already condemned.
Mickey, do you think it's even harder in the military context? Because obviously there's a whole, legal profession outside of military law. They don't step foot in a military courtroom. They don't kind of live by the code that I think there is associated with the military. Do you think it adds a level of difficulty and challenge representing folks in the military, in the area of military law?
I've done both, right? I've done the state and the military. I don't think that the pressure is any different. I think that the formalities are different, right? The gravity is the same. It's just how you execute it is slightly different. I agree with Rob about toughness. I mean, it's easy to look back on your career and think about all the great wins that you had and all the great feelings and everything. But being able to accept defeat, that's a tough thing if you care about your job. It just is. And you never get used to it. You never like it. Sometimes you expect to lose, right? But it's never an easy thing. And the courage part, I think, is saying what needs to be said to your client, to the witnesses. I remember one time Rob and I were doing a case in, what was the name of that Air Force Base? I think it was in South Carolina.
Shaw Air Force Base?
No.
Seymour Johnson, North Carolina.
North Carolina. Seymour Johnson. And we're about to go out there. We're doing witness interviews. And this one guy comes into the into the room that we're interviewing before. This is like we had a break, and there's like a surprise witness or something, and the guy is going to say something on the stand that we weren't anticipating. So we're like, well, let's see what the hell he's going to say. So bring him in. He starts talking, and Rob's trying to ask him questions. The guy's obviously lying, and Rob looks at the guy. His whole demeanor changed. And said, hey, if this is how it's going to go, when you get on the stand, I'm going to make you look really, really bad. He was much more dramatic than that.
Yeah.
But that takes courage, too, to let the guy know, hey, I'm calling you out in your BS. You better get it together or you're going to look like a damn fool out there.
Yeah.
And
I remember that. I remember that vaguely. And I remember, trying to kind of walk a fine line there. But we had interviewed him before and he was now like dating the accuser or something. I forget now. And his whole story fundamentally changed. And he needed to understand that he was going to have a tough time. And I think he did have a tough time.
Yeah.
And the you know how I feel about courage. I think it's probably one of the most important things out there because you can't do any other things without it. You can't be honest. You can't zealously advocate. You can't challenge the judge if the judge is out of line. You can't confront an overzealous prosecutor, right? You need the courage. You need that aspect to it. So yes, I think the toughness and the courage together make a formidable core value. You
think your background as a Ranger and your combat experience help you do that? I have to think that it 100% does, right?
I think that it's hard to say. So I oftentimes think about, is this tougher than this?
Yeah.
Right? Is this tougher than that? And if not, what am I complaining about? What am I worried about? Just get in there and do it. right? So I think from that, because I know I've done tough things before, and I've done things that were scary before, it helps put things into perspective. But I don't know if that's something I developed or if it was something that was always there. I don't know. Maybe it just sharpened it, right? Maybe it was like a whetstone. So I don't know. I don't really know where the chicken before the egg. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I can tell you, you have to be tough to work at Capovilla Williams, period. And when we go through the hiring process, which we've been blessed to hire really wonderful people, that is an aspect of it. Does this person have the mental makeup to travel across this country, go into courtrooms where they've never stepped foot before, in front of judges they don't know, against prosecutors they probably haven't worked against, and do what is required of them, which is try the case at a very high level. You know, our firm has Army Rangers like Mickey and Dan. Our firm has judge advocates who deployed to all the different areas and spots of the world. Sean's been in a combat zone, 2 different deployments, I believe, to a combat zone. You've got to be tough to do what we do. You got to be tough to work at this firm. Otherwise, there's just not going to be a spot for you. And we try to make that clear to our employees. And we're lucky because we have the kind of people that we need to have to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got a nice team. I mean, I think your team's going to have to grow eventually, but you certainly have a really nice team now of solid attorneys with great experience and a hell of a lot of commitment.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. Just a couple of years ago, it was just Rob and me, and now we've got all these other people. It's really cool, and they're all part of the culture now. Like they're all in that because we do this. We read the core values, the mission statement every week. Every week when we sit down and have a meeting, everybody's required to be there. Everybody's required to hear the mission statement, hear the core values. And I think it's just one of those deals where, just like Rob said, when we do the evaluations once annually, we're checking the boxes on these core values, kind of like they do there was a lot of inspiration from the military, because just like in the military, when you do an OER, what are they looking at? They're looking at the Army values. How have they led? When you're doing your support form, leadership, duty, loyalty, all these things, development.
Well, you're holding your team accountable to each other, to the clients, and without that, things fall out. The train comes off the rails pretty quick if you don't have that accountability.
Yeah, and understand, we know that not everybody is going to have the core values 100% every day. That is the goal. But I struggle with it myself, and I know Rob does too. It's just one of those things that you just have to keep reminding yourself of so you can get there and hope to stay there.
Yeah. All right, gents. Well, I think we're getting near the end. You do have one last core value, which is trial advocacy. I think we touched on some of this. Rob, I know you believe some of this is knowing the rules, knowing the law, and I think that's a big part of what you guys do. You have to know the law. You have to know the procedural aspects. A lot of that comes from experience. But anything you want to add to that, or do you think we've covered it sufficiently?
No, I've always felt that this last core value is more specific to in-trial performance. And you are correct. A big part of that for me is making sure that everybody in my firm, including myself, doesn't just have a workable understanding or knowledge of the rules of evidence, but that they are masters of those rules. I think the actual, for every core value, we have a little paragraph that kind of further explains why we think that or feel this should be a core value. And in that paragraph, we talk about knows the rules of evidence like they know the back of their hands. And that requires discipline as well. Most mornings when I get up and I get to the office, the first thing I do is I set aside 10 minutes to read a different rule, because it's a tangible skill and it will leave you if you don't know the rules. And I also believe this gives us a huge advantage over most of our competition. Most of our competition, their knowledge of the rules cannot compete with our knowledge of the rules just because Mickey and I have been doing this for so long. So trial advocacy to me means execution in the courtroom, handling the pressure, delivering under pressure, opening statements, closing arguments, being ready for a cross-examination, understanding how to impeach an accuser who changes their story, understanding how to use contradicting evidence to impeach a witness, understanding what 608 Alpha, Bravo, Charlie really mean, what 613 really means, all these different tools that are given to you to do your job well. You've got to understand them. And Mickey and I are at a point now in our careers where, quite frankly, we sometimes have to explain things to judges. And I don't say that from an arrogant point of view. I say that factually.
Yeah.
That's what's been happening a little bit the last year or so, especially when it comes to impeachment and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, last core value, trial advocacy, it speaks for itself.
Is that part of the fun, Mick? Is that part of the fun, kind of getting in there? I mean, obviously, a lot of the stuff isn't fun in the sense like riding a roller coaster at Six Flags, but is that some of the fun and enjoyment for you, is to go into a courtroom or a hearing and know that you know the most about this subject matter?
That is fun, right? It's like playing a video game on easy, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that,
Yeah.
I guess. To me, the most fun is when you get an arrogant CID, NCIS, OSI agent on the stand and you eviscerate them with their own investigation,
Yeah.
right, and their own bias, and you
TV
watch
type stuff.
and you watch the government's case fall apart. That to me is the most fun. Openings, if you do a great opening, that's great, but what happens right after opening? You got to cross-examine the accuser, so that's short-lived. You do a great cross on the accuser, which we always do, right? Because we're prepared. That's always fun, but that's sometimes tough because you're talking about subject matter that can be very sensitive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, no, it's fun. It's fun to get in there and do a great job because, like Rob said, that's game day for us. That's what we've been training for, preparing for. And I oftentimes think of it like skydiving or cliff diving or base jumping. It's the thinking about the jumping that's the difficult part.
Yeah.
And the actual jump is difficult. But once you're falling, that's all fun. And that's trial for me, right?
Last question, gentlemen. How does this change over the years, or does it? Do you add to these core values? Are they flexible? Do you do anything differently in the future, 5 or 10 years down, as 10 years down the road as Capovilla and Williams grows? Do you do anything differently?
Well, they are functional, and I think because of that, we have to reevaluate them. I know that during the holiday season, every year, Mickey and I take some time where we'll go to have a drink or a cigar or whatever, and we'll talk about these for 2, 3, 4 hours. We'll think about them. We'll talk about them some more. We'll make changes to them if we need to, because the world is ever evolving. I'm pleased with the rules that I'm pleased with the values that we have right now. I don't see them changing, but certainly we'd be open to changing them if something were to spur that change. Because you have to grow and you have to evolve. You have to get better at things. Leadership styles change from time to time. So yeah, I don't think that they're set in stone, so to speak. I think that they, if they ever needed to be changed, we would.
Mickey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's one of those developments that happen over time. I like where we are now with it. I really do. I think we've done a good job. But certainly if something happens in the next 5-10 years where we think that we need to address or expand upon something, then yeah, sure, absolutely. But I think right now it's hard enough to try to stay current with the ones that we have and keeping that in perspective.
Yeah,
instead of what we don't want to do is have, like when you go to a Mexican restaurant, they got 100 different menu items on there. I like it.
Starts to dilute.
Yeah, I like, because if you got too many, I just like at the restaurant, you can't specialize and focus on one specific core value. So, yeah, sure, absolutely, there's potential for it to grow, but I think right now, maybe we should have like an amendment process like they have with the Constitution.
Yeah.
You have to get 3/4 votes or something.
The only change I've thought about recently is combining zealous advocacy and zealous advocacy and performance in the courtroom, making that just kind of one rule rather than two. I think there's a little too much crossover there. But outside of that, these have been pretty fundamental to our growth as a firm.
I think it's been a phenomenal episode. I love these episodes because I love to hear you guys talk about it. I don't think lawyers do this enough. We don't, our podcast episodes are never a sales pitch, but I am going to say this as somebody who works with a lot of law firms. If you're evaluating military attorneys, you really owe it to yourself to ask them what their core values are or what their philosophy is, and listen carefully to that answer. See if that lawyer even knows where to start answering that question. And if they don't, give a lot of thought to whether or not it's really the law firm for you. Because when a lawyer kind of knows what they believe in, what they feel passionately about, that's going to reflect very directly on the representation that client gets. So,
Rich, we need a sound effect after that. Yeah. Hit it.
Yeah, that's good.
There it is.
One thing I would say about that, too, if you are a prospective employee, it might be a good idea to learn what these core values are, too, because you might be asked about them. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, a phenomenal episode. I loved it. And I think our listenership will as well. So maybe we'll do something like this again. We did do the making of Capovilla and Williams maybe over a year ago. That's probably worth a listen to as well. That one was fun. But we're going to sign off for today. Happy New Year to everybody. We'll be back with new episodes shortly. And saying goodbye for Robert Capovilla, Mickey Williams. I'm Matt Starosiak. Have a great rest of your day and be safe.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.